He ignored his bleeding knees and kept running after the baby stroller in the rain. The next morning, when a black SUV stopped at his door, his mother nearly fainted at what the businessman revealed. Marcus pulled his worn backpack tighter against his shoulders as he walked past the mall entrance. The morning crowd was already flowing in and out of the sliding glass doors, carrying shopping bags with fancy logos he'd seen in TV commercials. He kept to the edge of the parking lot, away from the shiny cars and busy shoppers. "Remember what I told you," his mother's words from breakfast echoed in his head. "Just get to school and back. Don't hang around the mall." She had said it while rushing to put on her cleaning uniform, dark circles under her eyes from working late again. "Yes," he'd promised, watching her gulp down cold coffee. Now, walking past a BMW that probably cost more than their apartment, Marcus checked his reflection in the tinted windows. His school uniform was clean but faded from too many washes, the white collar slightly frayed. At least his shoes were tied tight, even if the soles were starting to separate. A security guard near the entrance turned to watch him. Marcus kept his hands visible, walking steady, not too fast to look suspicious, not too slow to look like he was loitering. He'd learned that lesson 4 years ago, when he was 8. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd been looking at action figures in the toy store window, nose pressed against the glass, imagining what it would be like to own one. The security guard had grabbed his arm so hard it left bruises. "What did you take, boy?" The guard had shaken him, checking his pockets while shoppers stared. "Nothing. I was just looking." But they made him empty his backpack right there, his school books and old lunch container spilling onto the floor. His mother had to leave work early to come get him. She cried that night when she thought he was asleep. A car horn snapped Marcus back to the present. He quickened his pace across the parking lot, focusing on the cracked asphalt under his feet. The sky was turning dark gray, threatening rain. "Hey, Marcus, wait up, young man." He turned to see Mrs. Johnson waving from her rusty Honda. The elderly woman lived in their apartment complex and often needed help with groceries. Today she was struggling with several heavy bags. "Let me help you with those, Mrs. Johnson," Marcus said, jogging over. He wasn't going to be late. He always left early enough to help neighbors if needed. "Such a good boy," Mrs. Johnson smiled, handing him the heaviest bags. "How's your mama doing?" "Working hard as always." Marcus carried the bags to her trunk. "She picked up extra cleaning shifts this month. Lord knows she works too hard. You're a blessing to her, helping out like you do." Mrs. Johnson patted his shoulder. "Here, take this for your lunch." She pressed a $5 bill into his hand. "Oh no, Mrs. Johnson, I can't dash. You take it now. Growing boys need to eat proper." Marcus carefully tucked the money into his pocket. His mother had taught him never to refuse kindness rudely, even when pride made you want to. As he resumed his walk to school, the first fat raindrops began to fall. Marcus stopped and took off his shoes, stuffing them into his backpack. They were his only pair. He couldn't risk them getting ruined. The asphalt was rough and cold under his bare feet. Mr. Wilson, the school janitor, was sweeping the front steps when Marcus arrived. The old man looked up at the sky and shook his head. "Gonna be a rough one today. You got caught in it?" "Huh." He noticed Marcus's bare feet. Smart thinking, saving those shoes. But he disappeared into his closet and came back with a pair of plastic shoe covers. "Put these over your socks at least. Can't have you catching cold." "Thanks, Mr. Wilson." Marcus smiled, slipping them on. The janitor was one of the few adults at school who treated him like a person, not a problem waiting to happen. "You know, Marcus, I see you walking past every morning, always stopping to help folks. That means something." Mr. Wilson leaned on his broom. "My dad used to say character is what you do when nobody's watching. You got good character, boy." The rain was falling harder now. Thunder rolled in the distance as students rushed inside, holding bags over their heads. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching the storm clouds gather over the mall parking lot. Something felt different about today. The air was heavy, electric. "Better get to class," Mr. Wilson said, pushing his broom through puddles already forming on the steps. "Looks like this storm's only getting started." Marcus nodded, but hesitated a moment longer. From here he could see the whole parking lot, the expensive cars gleaming wet in the gray light. He thought about his mother, probably already on her hands and knees cleaning someone else's floors. About Mrs. Johnson's kindness and Mr. Wilson's wise words. The $5 bill felt heavy in his pocket as he finally turned away from the storm and headed to his first class. He didn't know it yet, but in a few hours, that parking lot would become the scene of the most important moment of his young life. The rain kept falling harder and harder, as if trying to wash away the invisible lines between Marcus's world and the one on the other side of those sliding glass doors. Thunder crashed again, closer this time. The storm was almost here. The final bell rang at 3:15. Marcus gathered his books slowly, watching sheets of rain hammer against the classroom windows. His feet were still damp in his shoes, even with Mr. Wilson's covers. "You walking home in this?" James from the next desk asked. "Got no choice." Marcus shrugged. "Mom needs a bus fare for work." The halls were crowded with kids discussing rides and umbrellas. Marcus moved through them quietly, head down. At his locker, he wrapped his books in a plastic grocery bag before putting them in his backpack. The $5 bill from Mrs. Johnson was still in his pocket. He could use it for the bus, but that felt wrong. The rain had turned the mall parking lot into a maze of puddles. Marcus stood under the school's entrance awning, watching people run between cars with shopping bags over their heads. Through the sheets of rain, he could see the bright lights of the mall's interior glowing like a separate world. A sleek black Range Rover pulled up to the mall's main entrance. A woman stepped out, phone pressed to her ear, designer purse held over her perfectly styled hair. Even from this distance, Marcus could see her jewelry catching the light. "No, we absolutely cannot accept anything less than platinum sponsorship," she was saying loudly into the phone. "The whole point of the charity gala is exclusivity." She clicked a button on her key fob and the rear door opened automatically. Marcus watched as she pulled out the fanciest baby stroller he'd ever seen, all chrome and leather, probably worth more than his mother made in a month. The baby inside was tiny, wrapped in what looked like a cashmere blanket. The woman was still talking on the phone as she adjusted the stroller's hood against the rain. Their donation last year was embarrassing. If they want a table this time, they need to hold on. I'm getting another call. She stepped away from the stroller, pacing near a column. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen this before. People so focused on their phones they forgot what was happening around them. Last week, a lady had almost backed her Mercedes into a cart return while texting. Two security guards walked past the woman, barely glancing at her. One of them was new, but Marcus recognized the other, the same one who'd accused him of shoplifting 4 years ago. He instinctively stepped back into the shadow of the awning. The wind was picking up, sending rain sideways in heavy gusts. Marcus thought about his mother, what she'd say if she were here. "Those people live in a different world, baby," she told him countless times. "Best thing we can do is stay out of their way." She worked in houses like theirs, cleaning up their messes, raising their kids while they were too busy with phones and meetings. Every night she came home exhausted, hands raw from cleaning products. "Just keep your head down," she always said. "Don't give them any reason to notice you." The woman was gesturing angrily now, walking further from the stroller. "No, you listen to me. We're not some discount charity event." Marcus noticed it before anyone else, the small movement of the stroller's wheels. The woman had stopped on level ground, but she'd left the stroller just at the edge of the mall's sloped entrance area. One of the front wheels was turned outward. His heart started beating faster. The wind gusted again, stronger this time. The stroller shifted another inch. He called out, but his voice was lost in the rain and traffic noise. The security guards had disappeared around the corner. The stroller moved again, more noticeably this time. The slope wasn't steep, but with the wet pavement. Marcus looked around frantically. Other shoppers hurried past, heads down against the rain, no one paying attention. The woman was now completely turned away, one finger pressed against her other ear to hear better. The baby made a small sound, not crying yet, but unsettled. The stroller rolled another few inches. Time seemed to slow down. Marcus heard his mother's voice again. "Stay out of their way. Don't get involved." But all he could see was that tiny baby, the wet pavement, the cars pulling in and out of parking spots. The stroller wasn't locked. The brake wasn't on, and the slope led straight toward the busy part of the lot. A car horn blared nearby, making Marcus jump. When he looked back at the stroller, it had moved again. The front wheels were now completely over the edge of the slope. His hands started shaking. He should run get the security guards. He should yell louder for the mother. He should. The wind gusted one more time, hard enough to rattle the awning above him. Marcus watched in horror as the stroller's back wheels lifted slightly off the ground. And then it started to roll. The stroller's wheels caught speed on the wet pavement. Marcus felt his feet moving before his brain could catch up. His backpack hit the ground behind him as he sprinted into the rain. "Hey, stop, baby stroller!" His voice cracked as he shouted. The woman finally turned, phone still at her ear. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" The stroller was rolling faster now, water spraying from its wheels. The baby started crying, a high-pitched wail that cut through the sound of rain and traffic. Marcus ran harder, his bare feet slapping against the wet asphalt. He'd taken his shoes off again to keep them dry. Now every step sent sharp pain through his soles, but he couldn't stop. "My baby!" The woman's scream finally pierced the air. "Somebody help! Please!" People turned to look. A man with shopping bags took a few steps forward, then stopped, unsure. A teenager pulled out his phone and started recording. The stroller hit a small bump and veered left, picking up speed as it headed toward a row of parked cars. The baby's cries grew louder. Marcus's lungs burned. He was closing the distance, but not fast enough. His foot hit something sharp, probably broken glass, but he kept running. "Call security!" Someone yelled. "Someone stop it! Oh my God! That poor baby!" Voices blended together as a crowd started to gather. Phones appeared everywhere, recording the scene. But no one moved to help. Marcus stretched out his arm as he got closer to the stroller. His fingers brushed the handle, but the wet metal slipped through his grasp. He lunged forward, trying to grab it again, but his feet shot out from under him on the slick pavement. He hit the ground hard, skinning both knees. Hot pain shot through his legs as he scrambled to get up. The baby's mother was running now too, high heels in hand, mascara running down her face. "Please, somebody help my baby." The stroller was heading straight for the main traffic area where cars entered and left the mall. A red SUV honked as it swerved to avoid the runaway stroller. Marcus pushed himself up, ignoring the blood running down his shins. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The crowd's voices seemed far away now. His mother's warnings echoed in his head. "Stay out of their way. Don't get involved. Those people will never see you as anything but trouble." The stroller clipped a curb and spun, now rolling backward. The baby's screams grew more terrified. A security guard's radio crackled somewhere in the distance. "We have a situation in the north lot." Marcus saw the intersection ahead. The light was changing. Cars were starting to move. Everything his mother had taught him about staying safe, staying invisible, staying out of rich people's business. All of it fell away. There was only the baby's cry, the wet pavement, and the distance he had to close. He ran faster than he'd ever run before. His feet were definitely bleeding now, leaving faint red marks on the black asphalt. The rain felt like needles against his face. Ahead, the traffic light turned green. Cars began moving through the intersection. The stroller was less than 20 feet from entering the traffic flow. Marcus heard someone in the crowd say, "That black kid is going to get himself killed." 10 feet from the stroller now, the baby's blanket had fallen off, getting caught in one of the wheels. The chrome frame gleamed in the rain. 5 feet. A car horn blared. Brakes squealed somewhere close by. 3 feet. The stroller hit another bump and started to tip. 2 feet. Marcus could see the baby's terrified face clearly now. 1 foot. His mother's voice. "Don't get involved." But he was already diving forward, arms outstretched, everything moving in slow motion. His fingers closed around the stroller's handle just as its front wheels entered the intersection. He pulled back with every ounce of strength he had, his bare feet skidding on the wet pavement. The stroller spun, then stopped. The sudden silence was broken only by the baby's continued cries and the sound of rain. Marcus stayed where he was, holding the stroller firmly, breathing hard. His knees stung. His feet throbbed. Water dripped from his soaked clothes. The crowd was moving closer now. Phone still recording. People murmuring. "Did you see that? That boy just saved that baby. Someone call an ambulance. Where's the mother?" Marcus looked up to see the security guards pushing through the crowd. One of them had his hand on his radio, eyes narrowed with suspicion. The baby was still crying, but softer now. Without thinking, Marcus reached down to fix the wet blanket, trying to shield the infant from the rain. "Don't you touch my baby!" The mother had finally caught up, pushing past people to reach the stroller. Her face was a mix of terror, relief, and, when she looked at Marcus, uncertainty. Marcus stepped back, hands raised. The brake wasn't on, he said quietly. It just started rolling. The security guard he recognized from 4 years ago stepped forward, hand raised. Hold it right there, son. Don't move. Marcus's feet were bleeding, his knees were scraped raw, and he was soaked to the bone. But he stood his ground, looking directly at the mother. The brake wasn't on, he repeated. I saw it start to roll. Nobody was doing anything. I had to. His voice trailed off as more security arrived. He could hear sirens in the distance. The rain kept falling, but nobody in the crowd moved. They all stood frozen, phones still recording, watching to see what would happen next. Marcus thought about his backpack, abandoned back by the school entrance. About his mother, who would be furious when she found out what he'd done. About Mr. Wilson's words from that morning. Character is what you do when nobody's watching. Except now everybody was watching. And Marcus had no idea what would happen next. Marcus's feet left bloody prints on the wet pavement as he replayed the last 3 minutes in his mind. His chest still heaved from the run, rain mixing with sweat on his face. The security guard took another step forward. I said, don't move, kid. A small crowd had formed a circle around them. Dozens of phones pointed at Marcus, the crying baby, and the mother who stood frozen between them. Wait, the mother said, her voice shaking. Please wait. He saved her. He saved my Claire. The baby, Claire, had settled into whimpers, tiny hands reaching up from the stroller. The expensive blanket lay in a wet heap on the ground. We need to follow protocol, the guard said. There's been an incident involving a minor and Dash. An incident. A man in a business suit stepped forward from the crowd. I saw the whole thing. That boy's a hero. I got it all on video. More voices joined in. He ran barefoot across the parking lot. Did you see how fast that stroller was going? Someone could have died. Marcus's knees throbbed. He looked down at his feet. Cuts and scrapes covered both soles. A small pool of pink water formed where he stood. The mother noticed too. Oh God, you're bleeding. She turned to the security guards. He needs medical attention. Now. We still need to dash. I don't care about your protocols. She was shouting now. Makeup streaked down her face. That boy just saved my baby's life while all of you stood around doing nothing. A mall medic pushed through the crowd with a first aid kit. Let me check his feet. Marcus stayed still as the medic knelt down. The cold pavement sent shivers up his legs. Some nasty cuts here, the medic said, pulling out gauze. Might need stitches. What's your name, son? Marcus, sir. Marcus Thompson. Well, Marcus, you're going to need to sit down so I can clean these. A crack of thunder made everyone jump. The rain was falling harder now. Let's get him inside, the mother said. She had one hand on the stroller brake, locked now, and was fishing in her purse with the other. I'm calling my husband. He needs to know what happened. The security guard still looked uncertain. We need to file a report. Then file it, but do it inside where this boy can get proper medical attention. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking as she dialed. Marcus felt lightheaded. The adrenaline was wearing off, and every cut and scrape screamed for attention. He swayed slightly. The medic caught his arm. Easy there. Shock's setting in. We need to get him warm and dry. 2 more security guards arrived with a wheelchair from the mall's customer service desk. Marcus started to protest, but his legs gave out as soon as he tried to move. As they helped him into the wheelchair, he caught fragments of the mother's phone conversation. Could have died. Richard? No. You need to come now. Yes, right now. A young boy saved her. He's hurt. I don't care about the meeting. The crowd parted as they wheeled Marcus toward the mall entrance. People were still recording, still whispering. He heard someone say, that kid's gonna be on the news tonight. Inside, the bright lights and air conditioning hit him like a wall. His wet clothes felt ice cold. He started shivering. The medic noticed. We need blankets. And someone find this kid some dry clothes. They wheeled him to the mall's first aid station, a small room near customer service. The mother followed with the stroller, still on the phone. Richard, listen to me, she was saying. If that boy hadn't been there. Yes, he's just a child himself, running barefoot through the rain because our daughter was in danger. I don't know. Maybe 12 or 13. Yes. His feet are all cut up. No. The security guards weren't. I know. I know. Marcus tried to focus on what the medic was doing, cleaning his feet with stinging antiseptic, picking out small pieces of glass and gravel. But the pain was getting worse. Sorry, this is going to hurt, the medic warned, applying more antiseptic. But we need to prevent infection. A mall employee arrived with a stack of towels and a mall security sweatshirt. Best I could find on short notice. Thank you, the mother said, ending her call. She turned to Marcus. My husband's on his way. He's bringing a doctor. Marcus tried to sit up straighter. That's not necessary. I just need to call my mom and dash. Absolutely not. She cut him off. You're getting proper medical care. I insist. She stepped closer to his chair, then hesitated. Her designer outfit was soaked. Mascara created dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady now. I'm Catherine Walsh, she said. And that baby you saved? That's my daughter Claire. She's only 6 months old. If you hadn't, her voice cracked. The baby had fallen asleep in the stroller, exhausted from crying. Her tiny chest rose and fell peacefully. I should have checked the brake, Catherine said. I always check the brake. But that phone call. I was distracted. I could have lost her. Tears started falling again. A security guard offered her a tissue. Marcus wanted to say something, but another wave of pain shot through his feet as a medic wrapped them in gauze. Almost done, the medic said. But some of these cuts might need stitches. How long until that doctor arrives? Richard said 15 minutes, Catherine replied. He's bringing Dr. Chen from his private practice. More mall officials had arrived. They huddled near the door, whispering and casting worried glances at Marcus. The police will want statements, one said. The media is already asking questions, another added. We need to review the security footage. Marcus closed his eyes. His mother would be getting off her cleaning shift soon. She'd expect him home, doing homework at the kitchen table. Instead, he was sitting in a mall first aid station, surrounded by security guards and rich people, his feet wrapped in bandages. I need to call my mom, he said again, louder this time. She'll be worried. Catherine nodded. Of course. Use my phone. She handed him her iPhone, the latest model, probably worth 2 months of his mother's rent. Marcus's hand shook as he dialed. The phone rang 4 times before his mother answered. Hello. Her voice was tired from work. Mom? It's Marcus. Baby? Why aren't you calling from home? What's wrong? Marcus took a deep breath. Mom, something happened at the mall. He heard her sharp intake of breath, felt the fear in her silence. Everything she'd ever warned him about. All the reasons to stay away from rich people's world crashed together in his mind. But when he looked at baby Claire, sleeping peacefully in her expensive stroller, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Mom, he said, I need you to come to the mall. And try not to worry. I did what was right. I promise. Thunder crashed outside as Marcus began to tell his mother what had happened, knowing their lives would never be quite the same after today. The first aid station felt too small with everyone crowded inside. Marcus sat in the wheelchair, his bandaged feet elevated, watching the clock on the wall. 5 minutes since he called his mother. 10 minutes until Mr. Walsh would arrive with the doctor. Marcus. Catherine Walsh knelt beside his chair. Your mother. Will she be able to leave work? Yes. She cleans houses in River Heights. Her last client for today lives near here. Catherine's expression changed slightly at the mention of River Heights, the wealthy neighborhood where she probably lived. Does she work for the Hamilton family? Or maybe the Prestons? The Richardsons, Marcus said quietly. On Maple Drive. Oh. Catherine smoothed her wet skirt. I know Regina Richardson from the country club. An uncomfortable silence fell. Marcus could see Catherine doing the math in her head, realizing his mother might have cleaned her house or her friends' houses. The senior security guard cleared his throat. Mrs. Walsh, we still need to file an incident report. Can't that wait? Catherine stood up, protectiveness creeping into her voice. This boy is injured. He's waiting for medical care. Protocol requires dash. I don't care about protocol. Her voice rose sharply, making baby Claire stir in the stroller. Where was your protocol when my daughter was rolling toward traffic? Where were your security cameras and incident reports then? The guard stepped back, face reddening. I understand you're upset, But upset? My 6-month-old daughter nearly died in your parking lot. The only person who did anything was this 12-year-old boy, and now you want to treat him like some kind of suspect. 13, Marcus said softly. Everyone turned to look at him. I'm 13, not 12, he explained. My birthday was last month. Catherine's anger deflated slightly. 13, she repeated. Just a child yourself. She turned back to the guard. Do you have children? The guard shifted uncomfortably. 2 boys. Then imagine if it was your baby in that stroller. Imagine if your 13-year-old son ran barefoot through rain and broken glass to save someone else's child. Would you be demanding incident reports? Or would you be thanking God he was there? Before the guard could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. A tall man in an expensive suit burst through the door, followed by an older Asian man carrying a medical bag. Katie. The man in the suit, clearly Richard Walsh, rushed to his wife. Where's Claire? Is she She's fine, Catherine said, tears starting again. She's right here. Sleeping. Safe. Because of him. She pointed to Marcus. Richard Walsh turned, seeming to notice Marcus for the first time. His eyes took in the bloody bandages, the wet clothes, the mall security sweatshirt that was 3 sizes too big. Dr. Chen, he said sharply, and the Asian man stepped forward. Let me see those feet, Dr. Chen said, kneeling where the mall medic had been. He carefully unwrapped the bandages, examining each cut. How did this happen? Glass in the parking lot, the medic explained. He was running barefoot. Why barefoot? My shoes, Marcus said. They are my only pair. I didn't want them to get ruined in the rain. They've got to last until... He trailed off, embarrassed, but Dr. Chen just nodded. Smart thinking, usually. Not ideal for running on broken glass, though. He pulled supplies from his bag. Some of these cuts need stitches. I can do it here. But the door burst open again. Marcus! His mother stood in the doorway, still in her cleaning uniform, hair wild from running in the rain. Her eyes were wide with fear. Mom! Marcus tried to stand, but Dr. Chen held his legs still. Don't move, the doctor ordered. These cuts are deep. Marcus's mother rushed to his side, hands hovering over him like she was afraid to touch him. Baby, what happened? Are you hurt? When you said them all, I thought. Her voice caught. Mrs. Thompson. Catherine stepped forward. I'm Catherine Walsh. Your son. He saved my baby's life. Marcus watched his mother's face as Catherine explained what happened. Saw the fear turn to understanding, then pride, then worry again as she looked at his injured feet. He needs stitches, Dr. Chen said. I can do them here, but he'll need antibiotics too. And proper follow-up care. Marcus's mother wrung her hands. We don't. Our insurance. Everything will be covered, Richard Walsh said firmly. Every medical bill, every follow-up appointment, everything he needs. It's the least we can do. Mr. Walsh, Marcus's mother started. We can't accept Please, Catherine interrupted. Please let us do this. Your son ran through broken glass and rain to save our daughter. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think about himself. He just acted. She wiped fresh tears. How can we ever repay that? The security guard cleared his throat again. We still need statements for the report. Richard Walsh turned on him. You'll get your statements. After this boy receives medical care. After his mother has time to process what happened. After everyone has had a chance to dry off and calm down. His voice carried the authority of someone used to giving orders. Until then, I suggest you focus on reviewing your security protocols that allowed a baby stroller to roll into traffic in the first place. The guard retreated, muttering about paperwork. Dr. Chen had finished examining Marcus's feet. The stitches won't take long, but he'll need to stay off these feet for a few days. No school. But my homework, Marcus protested. And Mom needs help with No school, Dr. Chen repeated firmly. Doctor's orders. Marcus looked at his mother, saw the worry lines around her eyes. No school meant she'd have to take time off work to care for him. Time they couldn't afford. As if reading his thoughts, Catherine spoke up. I'll stay with him. Everyone turned to stare at her. Katie, Richard started. You have meetings Cancel them. Cancel everything. She lifted Claire from the stroller, holding her close. This boy saved our daughter. The least I can do is make sure he heals properly. She looked at Marcus's mother. If you'll allow it. Mrs. Thompson? Marcus watched his mother struggle with the offer. Pride warred with practicality in her expression. I can't ask you to dash, she began. You're not asking. I'm offering. Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. Please, let me do this one small thing in return for what your son did today. Thunder rumbled outside, softer now as the storm began to pass. In the quiet that followed, Marcus heard his mother take a deep breath. Okay, she said finally, but only if Marcus is comfortable with it. Everyone looked at him. Marcus thought about the long morning walk through the rain, about Mrs. Johnson's $5 bill, still in his wet pocket, about Mr. Wilson's words about character. Yes, he said, I'm comfortable with it. Dr. Chen nodded, pulling out a suture kit. Good. Now, this will sting a bit. As the doctor began to work, Marcus caught a glimpse through the first aid station window. The crowd in the mall had grown larger. People were still filming, still whispering. News cameras were setting up near the entrance. His quiet life of staying invisible was over. He just hoped his mother would understand why he'd broken her most important rule: don't get involved. But looking at baby Claire, safe in her mother's arms, he knew she would. Because she was the one who'd taught him about right and wrong in the first place. The stitches hurt, but Marcus barely noticed. He was too busy watching how the afternoon sun, finally breaking through the storm clouds, cast long shadows across the mall floor, shadows that seemed to connect everyone in the small room, erasing the lines between their different worlds, if only for a moment. The local news vans were still parked outside when Dr. Chen finished the last stitch. Marcus counted 17 stitches total, 8 in his left foot, 9 in his right. Keep them clean and dry, Dr. Chen said, wrapping fresh bandages around Marcus's feet. No walking for at least 3 days. After that, we'll see how they are healing. A mall employee had brought Marcus a pair of oversized slippers from the lost and found. They looked old but clean. How are we getting home? Marcus asked his mother. Their apartment was a 30-minute walk away. Impossible now. I'll have my driver take you, Richard Walsh said, checking his phone. He's bringing the car around back to avoid the media. Marcus's mother straightened her cleaning uniform. Mr. Walsh, that's not Dash, Mrs. Thompson, Richard interrupted gently. There are reporters out there. They've already got footage of what happened. Do you really want them following you on public transport? She sighed, smoothing Marcus's damp hair. No, you're right. Thank you. Catherine was changing Claire's diaper on a padded bench, humming softly to keep the baby calm. She looked different now, less intimidating without her perfect makeup and styled hair. The news people want statements, the senior security guard said from the doorway. They're not leaving without a story. Richard Walsh checked his watch. I'll handle the press. Katie, you take Claire home with Thomas. I'll have James drive the Thompsons home in the other car. Actually, Catherine said, finishing with Claire's diaper, I'd like to say something to the press. Her husband frowned. Katie, you're exhausted. You've been through a trauma dash. Exactly. She stood up, Claire cradled against her chest. I want people to know what happened here. I want them to know what this young man did. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the wheelchair. Mrs. Walsh, you don't have to dash. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm. Because tomorrow, those reporters will dig into everything. They'll find out where you live, where you go to school. They'll make assumptions. I want them to hear the truth from me first. Marcus's mother tensed. He knew what she was thinking. How many times had rich white people's truth hurt their family before? But Catherine wasn't finished. I want them to know how I failed today. How I was too busy with a phone call to check my baby's stroller brake. How everyone with their phones out just stood there filming while my daughter rolled toward traffic. She took a shaky breath. And how a 13-year-old boy, who had every reason to stay out of it, chose to run barefoot through rain and broken glass to save her. The room fell silent except for Claire's soft babbling. Mrs. Walsh, Marcus's mother said quietly, you don't owe us anything. You're wrong. Catherine handed Claire to her husband and knelt in front of Marcus's wheelchair. Your son could have died today trying to save my daughter. He didn't know who she was. Didn't know who I was. He just saw a baby in danger and acted. She looked up at Marcus's mother. You raised him that way. To do what's right, no matter what. Even when the world gives you every reason not to get involved. Marcus felt tears pricking at his eyes. His mother's hand tightened on his shoulder. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Excuse me? Everyone turned. A young woman in a mall security uniform stood there, holding Marcus's backpack. "I found this by the school entrance," she said. "It's pretty wet, but—" She handed it to Marcus. He unzipped it quickly, checking his books. The plastic bag had kept them mostly dry. The $5 bill from Mrs. Johnson was still in his pocket, soaked but intact. "The press is getting restless," the senior guard reported. "If you're going to make a statement." Richard Walsh nodded. "All right, Katie. You sure about this?" "Absolutely." She stood up, straightening her wet clothes. "Mrs. Thompson, would you and Marcus be willing to stand with me? You don't have to say anything. I want people to see you. To see him. Really see him." Marcus looked at his mother. In her cleaning uniform, she usually tried to be invisible in places like this. But today she stood straight and proud. "Yes," she said. "We'll stand with you." It took some maneuvering to get Marcus's wheelchair through the service corridors to a side entrance where the press had gathered. Camera lights blazed as soon as the doors opened. Catherine stepped forward first, Claire back in her arms. Richard stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. Marcus's mother pushed his wheelchair, positioning him next to the Walshs. The reporters started shouting questions. "Mrs. Walsh, can you tell us what happened? Young man, what made you run after the stroller? How fast was it moving? Were you afraid?" Catherine raised one hand and the shouting quieted. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "Today, I made a terrible mistake. I was distracted by a phone call and failed to secure my daughter's stroller. What happened next should haunt every person who stood there filming instead of helping." She paused, looking down at Marcus. But one person didn't just stand there. One person chose to act. She told the story simply, her voice breaking only when she described the moment Marcus caught the stroller. When she finished, she turned to face him directly. "There will be people who try to make this story about race, or class, or what's wrong with our society. But I want to focus on what's right. A young man who saw someone in need and didn't hesitate to help, even at great personal risk." She touched Claire's cheek gently. "My daughter is alive because of Marcus Thompson's courage and character." The question started again, but Richard stepped forward. "That's all for now. The Thompsons need to get home so Marcus can rest and recover." As they wheeled Marcus back inside, he heard cameras clicking rapidly. Tomorrow his face would be all over the news. People would recognize him at school, in the mall, on the street. But for now, he just wanted to go home. His feet throbbed beneath the bandages. His wet clothes clung uncomfortably to his skin. He was tired in a way he'd never been before. The Walsh driver was waiting at the service entrance with a black SUV. As they helped Marcus inside, Catherine touched his mother's arm. "I meant what I said about staying with him tomorrow. What time do you leave for work?" 5:30, his mother replied automatically, then caught herself. "But Mrs. Walsh, you don't need to dash. I'll be there at 5:15, Catherine said firmly. "With breakfast. And please, call me Katie." Marcus watched his mother's face as she processed this. The wealthy woman who hired people like her to clean houses, offering to bring them breakfast. But there was no pity in Catherine's eyes. Only genuine gratitude and something like respect. "Thank you, Katie," his mother said finally. The drive home was quiet. Marcus kept thinking about Mr. Wilson's words that morning. Character is what you do when nobody's watching. But people had been watching. They'd been filming instead of helping. His mother seemed to read his thoughts. "You did right today, baby," she said softly. "I know I always told you to stay out of their business, but you did right." Marcus looked down at his bandaged feet. "I was scared, Mom. Not of getting hurt, but of how people would see me. Security was already watching me when it happened." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "But you did it anyway. Because that's who you are." She smiled slightly. "That's who I raised you to be, even if it terrifies me sometimes." The SUV pulled up to their apartment building. Some neighbors were already gathering, probably having seen the news. "You ready for this?" his mother asked. "Things are going to be different now." Marcus thought about baby Claire's cry, about Catherine's genuine gratitude, about his mother's pride replacing her fear. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." The driver helped them inside, carrying Marcus while his mother brought the wheelchair. Tomorrow would bring more changes, more attention, more challenges to navigate. But for now, Marcus just wanted to change into dry clothes, eat dinner with his mom, and rest. His feet hurt, but his heart felt surprisingly light. He had chosen to act instead of watch, to help instead of film, to cross the invisible lines that divided their city into different worlds. And somehow, sitting in his own small living room with his bandaged feet propped up, that felt like more than enough for one rain-soaked afternoon. Marcus woke to the sound of voices in the living room. The digital clock by his bed read 5:12 a.m. His feet throbbed under the bandages as yesterday's memories flooded back. "Mrs. Walsh, this is too much," he heard his mother saying. "The breakfast, the medical supplies. Please, it's Katie. And it's not enough. Not nearly enough." Marcus tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. Dr. Chen's pain medication had worn off during the night. His bedroom door opened slightly. "Baby, you awake?" "Yes, Mom." His mother and Catherine Walsh entered, carrying trays. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the small room. "Good morning, Marcus," Catherine said. She looked different in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "How are your feet?" "Sore," he admitted. "But not too bad." That was a lie. Every slight movement sent sharp pains through his soles. But his mother had enough to worry about. "Dr. Chen will be here at 9 to check the stitches," Catherine said, setting down a tray laden with breakfast. "And I brought some supplies, gauze, antibiotic ointment, everything he recommended." Marcus's mother touched the fresh bandages on the bedside table. "This is medical-grade stuff. From a private pharmacy." "Richard insisted," Catherine said. He's not very good at showing emotion, but he was up all night making calls, arranging things." She pulled something from her bag, a tablet in a protective case. "The school sent your assignments. They've excused your absences, of course, but your teachers thought you might want to keep up." Marcus took the tablet carefully. They had a shared computer at school, but he'd never owned anything like this. "It's yours to keep," Catherine said quickly. "For schoolwork. And, well, you should probably see this." She opened a news website. Marcus's face filled the screen, a still photo from yesterday, him in the wheelchair next to the Walshs. The headline read, "Local Teens Heroic Save, a Story of Courage Across Divides." His mother sat on the bed, reading over his shoulder. More headlines followed. "Split-second decision saves infant. Teen hero risks life in mall parking lot. Mother's gratitude." He didn't hesitate. "They're calling you a hero," his mother said softly. Marcus closed the browser. "I just did what anyone would do." "But they didn't," Catherine said. "That's the point. Dozens of people stood there filming. You were the only one who acted." She checked her phone. "Richard's on his way. He wants to talk to you both." His mother tensed. "About what?" He didn't say. "But I know him. He's been different since yesterday. Quieter. Thinking." A knock at the front door made them all turn. Catherine checked her phone again. "His early." Marcus heard heavy footsteps in the living room. Then Richard Walsh appeared in the doorway. He filled the small space in his expensive suit, but something about his posture was different from yesterday. Less commanding, more uncertain. "Good morning," he said. "Marcus, how are you feeling?" "I'm okay, sir. Thank you for the medicine and everything." Richard nodded, then looked at Marcus's mother. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to discuss something with you. Both of you." He pulled an envelope from his suit jacket. Marcus recognized the logo of Riverside Prep, the most expensive private school in the city. His mother saw it too. "Mr. Walsh, please, hear me out." Richard's voice was different, humbler than yesterday. "I've been on the board at Riverside for 10 years. I donated millions to their scholarship fund. But yesterday made me realize something." He paused. "In all that time, I've never actually used my position to directly help someone. To change a life." He handed the envelope to Marcus's mother. "This is a full scholarship. Not just tuition, everything. Books, uniforms, meals, transportation, college prep courses. Through graduation." The room went very quiet. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. His mother's hand shook as she held the envelope. "We can't accept Dash." "You can," Richard interrupted gently. "And you should. Not as charity. Not as payment. But as recognition of character." He looked at Marcus. "Your son showed me something yesterday. Something I'd been blind to. Caught up in my own world of meetings and money." He sat in the room's only chair, leaning forward. "I saw the security footage this morning. Frame by frame. Do you know what I noticed, Marcus? You looked at that stroller for several seconds before it started moving. You saw the danger coming. You could have called out, alerted someone else. But when the moment came, you didn't waste time talking. You acted. Marcus remembered those seconds clearly. The internal debate, his mother's warnings, the choice. That's the kind of intelligence we need at Riverside, Richard continued. Not just book smarts. Real wisdom. Real character. Catherine stepped forward. We've already spoken to the headmaster. They are prepared to make accommodations while your feet heal. A driver will pick you up each morning. You'll have access to all the resources, all the opportunities. What about my friends? Marcus asked. My teachers. You can still see them, Richard assured him. This isn't about changing who you are. It's about opening doors that should have been open all along. Marcus's mother was reading the scholarship letter, tears in her eyes. This is too much, she whispered. No, Richard said firmly. What's too much is a system where a bright, brave young man has to walk barefoot through rain because he can't risk ruining his only pair of shoes. What's too much is security guards assuming the worst about a child based on his skin color. What's too much is my own daughter almost dying because everyone was too busy filming to help. He stood up. I can't fix everything, but I can do this. I can make sure Marcus gets every opportunity he deserves. He smiled slightly. Consider it a very selfish act. 20 years from now, I want to be able to tell my daughter that the boy who saved her life went on to do amazing things. Because he was finally given the chance. Marcus looked at his mother. She was still staring at the letter, but something in her expression had changed. The worry lines around her eyes had softened. Mom, he said quietly. She took a deep breath, then looked at the Walshs. Can we have a moment? To discuss this privately. Of course. Catherine gathered the breakfast trays. We'll be in the living room. Take all the time you need. When they were alone, Marcus's mother took his hand. Baby, this is a big change. A hard change. That school, it's a different world. I know, Mom. You'll have to work twice as hard. Prove yourself every day. Marcus squeezed her hand. I already do that. She laughed softly. Yes, you do. She looked at the letter again. Full scholarship. College prep. A real chance. But what about you? I help with chores. With shopping. I'll manage. She touched his cheek. My boy. Running into danger to save a baby. Making rich people see. She wiped her eyes. Your daddy would be so proud. Marcus felt tears coming. They rarely talked about his father. What do you think I should do? He asked. She was quiet for a moment, looking around his small bedroom, the second-hand furniture, the library books, the patched curtains. Finally, she smiled. I think you should do what you always do, baby. Work hard, stay true to yourself, and run toward good things just as bravely as you run toward danger. Marcus hugged her, ignoring the pain in his feet. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. She held up the scholarship letter. Should we tell them yes? Marcus nodded. Yes. They called the Walsh back in. Richard was on his phone, but he put it away immediately. We accept, Marcus's mother said simply. With gratitude, Catherine hugged her impulsively. Richard shook Marcus's hand. There will be paperwork, he said. Details to arrange. But we'll handle everything. A car horn honked outside. Catherine looked out the window and laughed. The news vans are back, she said. And half the neighborhood is out there. Marcus's mother went to look. Word travels fast around here. Do you want me to send them away? Richard asked. Marcus thought about it. No, he said. Let them stay. Let them see. See what? Catherine asked. That sometimes the lines between worlds aren't as fixed as we think. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one choice. He trailed off, embarrassed, but Richard was nodding. Wisdom, he said quietly. Like I told you. He checked his watch. Dr. Chen will be here soon, and we have a lot to organize. But Marcus. Yes, sir. Thank you. Not just for saving Claire. For teaching me something about courage. About really seeing people. As if on cue, car doors slammed outside. Dr. Chen had arrived, along with more reporters. Marcus looked at his bandaged feet, then at his mother's proud face, then at the scholarship letter that would change everything. Sometimes the biggest journeys started with the smallest steps, even if those steps were barefoot through the rain. 2 weeks after the incident at the mall, Marcus stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his new Riverside prep uniform. The navy blazer felt stiff, the tie uncomfortable around his neck. His feet, mostly healed now, were wrapped in soft bandages inside the most expensive shoes he'd ever owned. "You look handsome, baby." His mother stood in the doorway, already dressed for work. "Need help with that tie?" "No. Katie showed me yesterday." He tightened the knot carefully. "Did you eat breakfast?" "Yes, and your lunch is packed." She smiled. "Though I hear the cafeteria at Riverside serves restaurant-quality meals." A car horn sounded outside, 2 short beeps. The Walsh driver was right on time, as usual. "That's James," Marcus said, grabbing his new leather backpack. The tablet from Catherine was inside, along with textbooks that still smelled new. His mother handed him his lunch anyway, just in case. They walked to the front of the apartment building together. Some neighbors waved from their windows. They'd gotten used to the fancy car arriving each morning. James stood by the black SUV in his uniform. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson." "Mrs. Thompson." Marcus still wasn't used to being called Mr. Thompson. He climbed into the back seat, waving to his mother through the tinted window. "Have a good day, baby. Remember, Mrs. Johnson asked if you can still help her with groceries on Saturday." "I remember, Mom." As the car pulled away, Marcus watched his mother head toward the bus stop in her cleaning uniform. Some things hadn't changed. The drive to Riverside Prep took 20 minutes. Marcus spent it reviewing his class schedule on the tablet. He had advanced mathematics first period. They tested him last week and moved him up a level. The school's iron gates opened automatically for the SUV. Students in identical uniforms walked across manicured lawns, carrying expensive bags and laptops. 2 weeks ago, Marcus would have felt completely out of place. Now, well, he still felt out of place, but differently. "Good luck, Mr. Thompson," James said as Marcus got out. "I'll be here at 3:30. Marcus nodded, straightened his tie one last time, and headed toward the main building. Other students glanced at him. They all knew who he was. The story had been everywhere. "Marcus! Hey, Marcus!" He turned to see Peter Chen running toward him. Dr. Chen's son had been one of the first students to welcome him during orientation last week. "Ready for Matthew's math test?" Peter fell into step beside him. "I think so. Your dad's tutorial helped a lot." "Yeah, well, Dad says you're family now." "Ever since." Peter trailed off, grinning. "You know, saving babies, getting famous, the usual." Marcus laughed. Dr. Chen had become a regular visitor, checking his feet and staying for dinner, trading stories with Marcus's mother about raising sons alone. They reached Marcus's locker, still surprisingly empty compared to others decorated with photos and stickers. He had one picture taped inside, him holding baby Claire at the Walsh house last weekend, both of them smiling at the camera. "Thompson." Marcus turned to see Jackson Walsh, Richard's nephew, approaching with a group of students. 2 weeks ago, they wouldn't have given him a second glance. "We're hitting the courts after school," Jackson said. "Coach says you can join once your feet are fully healed." "You play basketball?" "Yeah, at the community center." "Cool. Maybe next week then." Marcus nodded. "Maybe." The first bell rang. Students rushed to class, expensive shoes squeaking on polished floors. Marcus followed Peter into advanced mathematics, taking his seat near the window. Mrs. Matthews was writing equations on the whiteboard. She'd spent extra time with Marcus last week, helping him catch up on their curriculum. She turned as students settled into their seats. "Pop quiz," she announced, smiling at the collective groan. "Just a quick one to see who did the reading." Marcus pulled out his tablet, opening the digital textbook. He'd read the chapter 3 times last night, taking notes until his mother made him go to bed. The quiz appeared on their screens. Marcus started working through the problems, showing all his steps like Mrs. Matthews had taught him. The equations made sense in a way they hadn't at his old school, maybe because here he had all the right tools, all the support he needed. His phone buzzed quietly in his blazer pocket. A text from Catherine. Claire rolled over by herself this morning. Had to share with her hero. "Lunch this weekend." Marcus smiled, remembering how tiny Claire had felt in his arms last weekend. The Walsh had invited him and his mother over, and Catherine had insisted he hold the baby. Claire had grabbed his tie and wouldn't let go. "Time's up," Mrs. Matthews called. "Screens off, please." Marcus submitted his quiz. He'd known every answer. The rest of the morning passed quickly. In English, they discussed To Kill a Mockingbird. Marcus had already read it 3 times at his old school. In chemistry, he partnered with Peter for an experiment, using equipment he'd only seen in videos before. At lunch, he sat with Peter and some other students who'd gradually started talking to him. They discussed normal things, homework, sports, weekend plans. No one mentioned the mall incident directly, but he caught them watching him sometimes, curious. His mother had packed his favorite sandwich, but he tried the cafeteria food too. The pasta was better than any restaurant he'd been to. After lunch, he had study hall in the library. The space was huge, with tall windows and endless shelves of books. Marcus found a quiet corner and opened his tablet, starting his English essay early. A shadow fell across his screen. He looked up to see Lisa Martinez, one of the few other scholarship students, hovering nearby. "Is this seat taken?" she asked quietly. "No, go ahead." She sat, pulling out her own tablet. "Thanks. It's easier, sometimes, sitting with someone who gets it." Marcus nodded. He did get it. The weight of opportunity, the pressure to prove yourself worthy, the feeling of straddling two worlds. "Did you understand the chemistry homework?" Lisa asked. "I'm still struggling with molarity." "Yeah, let me show you my notes." They worked together until the bell rang. As they packed up, Lisa smiled. "Thanks for the help and, for showing it's possible." "What's possible?" "To be here. To belong, kind of. To change things." Marcus thought about that as he walked to his last class. Did he belong here? Not entirely. Not yet. But maybe that wasn't the point. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, making the hallway glow. Students rushed past in their identical uniforms. But Marcus noticed things now. The scholarship students walking a little straighter, the rich kids saying hello instead of looking through him, the gradual blurring of invisible lines. In history class, they were discussing social change. Marcus listened to his classmates debate civil rights movements, thinking about his own small role in changing perceptions. Real change, their teacher said, often starts with individual choices. Small moments that ripple outward. Like choosing to run after a runaway stroller, Marcus thought. Like Richard Walsh choosing to use his power to open doors. Like his mother choosing to let him walk through them. The final bell rang. Marcus gathered his things, heading outside where James waited with the SUV. "Good day, Mr. Thompson." "Yeah," Marcus said. "Pretty good." They drove through the iron gates, past the manicured lawns and expensive cars. Marcus watched the scenery change as they got closer to his neighborhood. Smaller houses, older cars, people waiting at bus stops in work uniforms 2 weeks ago. These differences had seemed impossible to bridge. Now he moved between the worlds daily, learning their separate languages, understanding their different rules. James pulled up to his apartment building. Mrs. Johnson was outside, watering her small flower bed. "Marcus, how was school?" "Honey, good." "Mrs. Johnson, still okay for groceries on Saturday?" "Of course. Though I hear you're having lunch with that nice Walsh family too." Marcus smiled. "Yes, but I've got time for both." He climbed the stairs to their apartment, hearing his mother's voice inside. She was home early. "Baby, that you?" "Yeah, Mom." He found her in the kitchen, still in her cleaning uniform, sorting through mail. "Look what came." She held up an envelope with the Riverside Prep logo. "Your midterm grades." Marcus took it nervously. They'd tested him extensively these past 2 weeks, measuring his progress. He opened the envelope slowly. All A's, with a note from the headmaster praising his exceptional dedication and rapid adaptation. His mother read over his shoulder, tears in her eyes. "That's my boy," she whispered, running toward good things. Marcus hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar smell of cleaning products and her favorite lotion. Outside, a car horn honked, probably another news van. They still came sometimes, looking for updates on that hero kid story. But the real story wasn't about heroism. It was about choices, chances, and the slow work of change. One barefoot run through the rain had opened doors, but walking through them, that was the harder part. Marcus hung his blazer carefully in the closet, put his shoes away, and sat down to start his homework. Tomorrow he'd do it all again, moving between worlds, building bridges, proving himself worthy of every opportunity. His phone buzzed. A text from Peter. "Dad says your feet should be good for basketball next week. Ready to show these rich kids how it's done." Marcus grinned, typing back, ready, because that's what all this was really about. Being ready when opportunity came, being brave enough to take it, being strong enough to hold on to it. Even if it meant running barefoot through the rain sometimes. 1 month after starting at Riverside Prep, Marcus stood in the mall parking lot where everything had changed. The pavement was dry today, the sky clear blue. His feet had fully healed, leaving only faint scars to remind him of that rainy afternoon. "You okay?" Catherine asked beside him, pushing Claire's stroller, a new one with triple lock brakes. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Just feels strange being back here." Claire squealed and reached for him. She did that now whenever she saw him, tiny hands grabbing at the air until he came closer. "Want to hold her?" Catherine asked. Marcus nodded, carefully lifting Claire from the stroller. She immediately grabbed his tie, her favorite game now. "Hard to believe it's only been a month," Catherine said, watching them. "Sometimes it feels like years." Marcus understood what she meant. His life had split into clear before and after moments. Before the rain, after the rescue. Before Riverside, after opportunity. The mall's automatic doors slid open. Inside, Saturday shoppers moved between stores, carrying bags and cups of coffee. A group of kids about Marcus's age passed by, phones out, laughing. "Marcus? That you?" He turned to see Mr. Wilson, the old janitor from his previous school, coming out of the hardware store. "Mr. Wilson. Hey, look at you, all dressed up fancy." Mr. Wilson smiled, noting the Riverside uniform Marcus still wore from morning study group. "Heard you're doing great at that new school." "Yes, sir. They have an amazing science lab, just like you talked about." Mr. Wilson had always told him stories about the lab equipment at private schools, encouraging him to dream bigger. "And this must be the little lady herself," Mr. Wilson said, looking at Claire. "The one who started it all." Claire babbled happily, still holding Marcus's tie. "She knows her hero," Catherine said softly. Mr. Wilson's eyes got misty. "You remember what I told you that morning? About character. 'Character is what you do when nobody's watching,'" Marcus quoted. "Well, that day, everybody was watching. But you showed your character long before that, helping folks, doing right even when it was hard." He patted Marcus's shoulder. "Some people just needed a dramatic moment to see what was always there." A security guard walked past, the same one who'd accused Marcus of shoplifting years ago. This time, he nodded respectfully. "Mr. Thompson." "Mrs. Walsh." "Officer Roberts," Catherine replied coolly. She knew the story now. Marcus had told her everything. The guard hesitated. "Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology, not just for last month, but for before. 4 years ago." Marcus shifted Claire to his other arm, surprised. "I made assumptions," the guard continued. "Treated you unfairly. Watched that security tape 100 times since then, thinking about how many times I was wrong about people. About kids like you." "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "That means something." The guard nodded and moved on. Catherine touched Marcus's arm. "You okay?" "Yeah." He smiled at Claire. "Better than okay." They walked through the mall together. The wealthy white woman, the black teenager in his prep school uniform, the baby who had brought their worlds together. People still stared sometimes, but differently now. Near the food court, they heard a commotion. A security guard was confronting a young black boy, maybe 10 years old, near the game store. "Empty your pockets," the guard was saying. Someone reported suspicious behavior. Marcus handed Claire back to Catherine and walked over. "Is there a problem?" he asked calmly. The guard looked up, recognizing him. The boy's eyes went wide. "You're the kid from the news. The one who saved the baby." Marcus turned to the guard. "What did he do?" "Someone reported. I mean, he was looking in store windows for a long time. I was checking game prices," the boy said. "Saving up for my birthday." Marcus remembered standing in the same spot 4 years ago, doing exactly the same thing. "I'll vouch for him," he said firmly. The guard stepped back. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. Sorry for the confusion." When the guard left, the boy stared at Marcus in awe. "That was cool. How'd you do that?" "By proving them wrong," Marcus said. "Every day, in every way I can." "What's your name?" "Deshaun." "Well, Deshaun, what game are you saving for?" They talked games for a few minutes. Marcus learned Deshaun lived in his old neighborhood, wanted to design video games someday. "You know," Marcus said, Riverside Prep has a computer programming club. They offer scholarships every year. He wrote down the information, handed it to Deshaun with a $20 bill. Put this toward your game. And apply for that scholarship. Dream big. Deshaun clutched the paper like a treasure map. Thanks, man. Really? Catherine had watched the whole interaction, smiling. As Deshaun left, she shifted Claire to her other hip. You just changed that boy's life. You know. Like you changed ours. Like you changed mine, Marcus corrected. It goes both ways. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Baby, you still coming to help Mrs. Johnson with groceries? I need to go, he told Catherine. Saturday errands. Want James to drive you? No thanks. I'll walk. It's a nice day. She understood. Some things needed to stay the same. They said goodbye in the parking lot where it had all started. Claire cried a little when Marcus stepped away. She did that now too. See you tomorrow for lunch? Catherine asked. Richard's grilling. Wouldn't miss it. Marcus walked home through familiar streets, his tie loosened, blazer slung over his shoulder. Kids played basketball at the community center where he now taught them private school math on weekends. Mrs. Chen, the doctor's wife, was teaching a free art class there too. Small changes rippling outward, like his history teacher had said. He found his mother and Mrs. Johnson waiting outside their building. There's my boy, his mother said proudly. She was dressed for her Saturday job, the only one she'd kept, cleaning for the Richardsons who'd been kind to her for years. Ready for shopping, Mrs. Johnson? Always ready for my favorite helper. They walked to the store together, Marcus carrying bags, hearing neighborhood news. Some things hadn't changed at all, but some things had changed profoundly. His phone buzzed again. The Riverside group chat about Monday's basketball game. Then a photo from Catherine. Claire sleeping with one hand clutching the tie he'd left at their house last week. Two worlds. Not separate anymore, but connecting. Because one boy ran through the rain. Because one family opened doors. Because change was possible, one choice at a time. Later that night, doing advanced calculus homework at his familiar kitchen table, Marcus heard the evening news mention his name again. Local hero continues to inspire. He tuned it out, focusing on his equations. The real story wasn't about heroism. It was about all the small moments that followed the big one. All the daily choices to keep running toward good things, to keep proving character, to keep building bridges between worlds. His mother came home from her Saturday job, tired but smiling. Good day, baby. Marcus thought about Mr. Wilson's pride, Deshaun's hope, the security guard's apology, Claire's laughter, Mrs. Johnson's groceries, and all the invisible lines that were slowly fading. Yeah, Mom. Really good. She kissed his forehead, started heating up dinner. Outside, a car horn honked, probably Peter arriving for their study session. Two worlds meeting again, naturally now. Marcus closed his calculus book, got up to set the table for three. His feet didn't hurt anymore, but they'd left scars to remind him of choices made, bridges built, changes started. Some things stayed the same, love, family, character. Some things changed, opportunities, perceptions, possibilities. The trick was knowing which was which, and being brave enough to run toward both.